All right. Good morning and welcome to the CRTPO Technical Coordinating Committee meeting. This is January 9th, 2025, and the time is now 10:06. Welcome everyone and Happy New Year. We'll start with introductions around the table and then we'll go into the audience in the room, starting with my left. So we'll start with
Hi,
you, Richard.
Rich Hoffman, Iredell County.
Heather Maloney, Town of Huntersville.
Erica Martin, Town of Martin.
Bjorn Hansen, Union County.
Aaron Tucker, Town of Cornelius.
James Kelly, Town of Waxhaw. Roger Castillo, Transportation Planning Division.
Justin Russell, Town of Stallings.
Alex Rittenberry, NCDOT Integrated Mobility Division.
Andrew Ventresca, Town of Troutman.
Travis Johnson, CRTPO.
Liz Babson, City of Charlotte.
Candace Rory, Charlotte Planning.
Dan Lieber, Charlotte General Services.
Brian Horton, CATS, MTC rep.
Diane Thomas, Public Health Focus Area.
Neil Panico, NCDOT Division 12.
Bryson Hester, City of Monroe.
Dave Campbell, Bicycle Focus Area, work at Charlotte DOT.
Megan Green, Mecklenburg County Air Quality.
Andrew Golden, Town of Davidson.
Justin Williams, Town of Mint Hill.
Sean Epperson, NCDOT Division 10.
Dana Sujanki, Town of Matthews.
Julie Warren.
Neil Berg, CRTPO.
Bob Cook, CRTPO.
Justin Garrell, Charlotte DOT.
Lizzie Keith, Kelly Warren. Elizabeth Richard, Kelly Warren. Cindy King, Town of Warren. Charlie Denning, Charlotte DOT.
Martin Kidman, Charlotte DOT. Will Tyler, CRTPO.
John Cox,
Division 10. Warren Cooksey, Turnpike Authority.
Caldwell, PH1, Brian Elford, CRTPO.
Earl Leonard, CRTPO.
James Bridges, CRTPO.
Aaron Kelly, CRTPO.
Peter Thompson, CRTPO.
All right, great. Thank you. And again, welcome to everyone and Happy New Year. All right, our first item is the adoption of today's agenda. May I have a motion to adopt today's agenda as shown? And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Our next item is adoption of today's consent agenda. May I have a motion for the approval of the November 7th, 2024 TCC minutes, the 2024-2033 TIP amendments, and the Union County Comprehensive Transportation Plan pedestrian map amendments? Thank you. And may I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? That also carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving into our first item of business. We are going to handle election of officers. And Travis and I think we figured this out after last year.
Yes, and we'll figure it out again this year.
So the first business item on today's agenda is election of the 2025 TCC officers. I'll provide a few guidelines for today's procedures. Then we'll conduct elections for the chair first and then the vice chair second. The nominee with a majority of vote wins the election. If no nominee wins a majority vote, a second round of voting will be conducted and all nominees will remain eligible for consideration. Before making a nomination for the chair and vice chair, please state your name for the record. The secretary will ask nominees if they consent to the nomination. If the nominee gives their consent, the secretary will state that and ask if there are any further nominations. We'll continue until there are no other nominations. If only one nominee is recommended, we'll remind members about the ability to dispense vote, ask for any objections, and then declare the nominee elected. If there are several nominees, we'll conduct a roll call vote for each nomination. And after the vote, the secretary will announce the nominee that received the majority of the votes. So Travis, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. If there are no questions about today's proceedings, first is I need a motion to open nominations for the 2025 TCC chair. This motion requires a first and a second. Second. And then I need a second. Okay. All right, so the floor is now open for nominations. Before making a nomination for chair, please state your name for the record. Liz Babson has been nominated for the position of TCC, or sorry, Liz Babson, do you consent to
I
the
did my part
nomination?
well. Yes, I consent. Thank you.
Okay. Liz Babson has positioned or has been nominated for position of TCC chair. Are there any further nominations? All right, hearing none, nominations are now closed. Because there was one nominee, we have the ability to dispense with the roll call vote. Are there any objections to declaring the nominee elected? All right, hearing none. Congratulations, Liz Babson, on being the TCC chair.
Thank you.
So now we get to do this again. A motion is required, or so action requested is a motion to open the nominations for the 2025 TCC vice chair. I need a first and a second. Thank you. The floor is now open for nominations. Before making a nomination for vice chair, please state your name for the record. Andrew Ventresca, do you consent to the nomination?
TCC is dissolved, right?
Yes, it is still.
I do.
Okay. Andrew Ventresca has been nominated for the position of TCC vice chair. Are there any further nominations? It's because we have the hearing none, nominations are now closed. So because we have one nomination, we have the ability to dispense the roll call vote and ask. So now I ask if there are any objections to declaring the nominee elected. Seeing no objections, congratulations to Andrew Ventresca, our vice chair.
All right. We'll move into our next item of business, which is election of focus area representatives. Travis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Action requested is to appoint focus area delegates and alternates for 2025. The TCC has 4 focus areas: bicycle, greenway, pedestrian, and public health. Focus area representatives serve as voting members on the TCC, and we need to appoint a delegate and alternate for focus areas. These appointees must be employed by a municipality or county government that is a voting member of the CRTPO. And these terms are for 1 calendar year beginning this month in January, and there's no limit to the number of terms they may serve. In 2024, the focus area reps are the names you see listed in front of you. And we have only 2 modifications for the recommended list for 2025. Bicycle and Pedestrian Work Group recommended the following representatives at their November meeting. It is one note that one of the previous recommended members is no longer works at a county government, so their name was removed from the proposed list. So you'll notice we still have a vacant slot for public health. We are working to identify a focus area rep who could serve in this role. However, the focus area reps need to be appointed to start the year. So this is the current list of recommended focus area reps as recommended by the Bicycle Pedestrian Work Group. And we might need to come back to you later in the year with an updated list to appoint an alternate for public health. So with that, the action requested is to appoint the focus area reps for delegates and alternates for 2025, which is this list in front of you.
Thank you, Travis. All right. May I have a motion to elect the bicycle, greenway, pedestrian, and public health focus area representatives to serve on the TCC for the 2025 calendar year?
So moved.
In a second. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed?
I'm sorry, who was the second? Thank you.
Thank you. And that finishes up our action items for today. So now we'll move into the information reports. We're going to hear from Bob and get an update on the FY26 UPWP annual budget.
Morning, everyone. Jarrell and I will be handling this presentation. The purpose is to review the first draft of the FY26 UPWP. So we'll go over a funding summary. I'll turn it over to Jarrell to talk about the Section 5303 funding. Then I'll come back and discuss the preliminary allocations, local projects, then get into next steps. And you did have a memo in your agenda packet. So this roughly follows what was in your agenda. So in terms of funding, this year we've received 1.4 million, 1,425,000 to be precise, in planning funds or PL funds. And by the way, all the dollars I'm talking about today and all the dollars Jarrell will talk about under 5303 are federal dollars, so they don't include the local match. That's just because sometimes the match, it can be different between funding sources and so forth. So keeping it at the federal level keeps everything consistent. So these are all federal dollars. So PL, again, $1,425,000. For the past 5, 6, maybe even more years, we've drawn down 1.1 million in STBGDA dollars. And then for 5303, we have just a little over $1 million, $1,022,547. And as we mentioned at the December 18th Transportation Staff Meeting, we are at this point estimating that our total PL and DA money for FY26 will be $2,525,000 in federal funds. But this is a preliminary number because we do need to still look at the trends coming out of the first 2 quarters of the current fiscal year. We have quarter 1 information, of course, but not quarter 2 at this stage. And we hope to have all that work done by the end of this month. But at this point, we're reasonably confident that that will be our total amount for both PL and DA for next year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jarrell to talk about 5303.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jarrell Leonard with CRTPO, Transit Planner. So as you may see on the screen, the 5303 is specifying the allocation of a little bit over 1 million with 22,000 above 1 million. The total allocated requested was about 1,058,000. So it's about a 36,000 difference between what was requested and what was available. So we specified the need of balancing out the available funds. A little bit of background on 5303. 5303 supports transit planning as well as multimodal planning, which includes complete streets. Allocations are based on the urban areas. In the 2020 census, North Carolina DOT had to create 2 new urban areas, which yields showing in the fiscal year 25, it was only 19, but it has gone up by 2 in fiscal year 26. So that shows that change. Statewide, there was a slight increase, but because of the 2 new urban areas, which is Clayton, North Carolina, as well as the Sand Hills, also known as Moore County MPO, they were created. So the funding amount for the CRTPO planning area did go down a little bit over 190,000, which is about a 15% reduction. With the 5303 FY26 estimate, CRTPO's Transit Providers Work Group, which is an auxiliary of this body, had advised all the recipients of the likelihood of a reduction to the planning area. The reduction allocation table you see below, it had forecast that we were going to get probably slightly below 1 million, but NCDOT Integrated Mobility Division specified in October of last year that we was getting the 1,022,000. So comparison of request. You can probably see on the second column of this table on this page, the specification of what was applied for in 25 and was granted in 25. Going back to that, the 1.2 million that was in FY25 granted, and the 66 million with that asterisk at the bottom of the totals, including a complete streets policy. And FY 26, we received these requests, and in the third column, and you can see which was the 1,058,000, which exceeded the 1,022,000 that is available. Most allocations were kind of balanced out, showing a reduction from CATS about 185,000. COTPO remained flat. Iredell County had increased theirs slightly by 28%. MRM lowered theirs by a little bit under 2,000. MTS, who has not applied in several fiscal years, actually the last time they applied was about 5 fiscal years ago. They had applied for the first time in those 5 fiscal years, and Union County increased theirs. So it showed that overall total of request was lower than the 25, but still exceeding the overall balance. And this is federal share only. And in this highlighting, showing the two who generally exceeded their amounts from the prior year and pretty much showed their increases. So staff recommendations, no change to CATS or MRM because they reduced their request voluntarily. MTS, since they have not applied in 5 fiscal years, we granted their 4 requests. We did recommend a reduction to ICATS and Union closer to their FY 25 request amounts, and CRTPO did request their amount as well to allow the balance for the federal share. A little bit more in detail, ICATS reduction. ICATS was recommended by staff of a reduction of 20,816 to closer to their request of the prior year, FY 25, showing 81,500, and reducing Union counties with a reduction of about 11,300, closer to their FY 25 amount of 139,505. And here's the overall breakdown showing the requested versus the recommended by staff, showing that CATS would get 490,000. CRTPO would lower their amount to 126,000. ICATS 81,500. MRM 119. MTS 66,000. Union County 139,505. And the overall balancing out at the bottom, as you could probably see, the differences between the requested and the available, the 36,211 recommended by staff. And these were specified in details, the solutions. Some of the solutions to make whole would be ICATS and Union County use the 5307 funds to close any gaps that were needed. 5307 can be used for planning activities. It has a 80-20 split similar to 5303. They do have sizable unobligated amounts available that they could utilize if need be for capital or planning activities. And we can include that in the UPWP. Any TIP amendment would have to be done prior to them including 5307 in the UPWP. So we could work extensively with those agencies to make sure their funds are incorporated in UPWP if they do their TIP amendments before the March TCC. That completes my portion. I'll pass it back to Bob.
Thanks, Jarrell. So I wanted to get into the actual allocations by task code. And as you, some of you might know or remember, our work program is divided up by task code. And so this first task code, data and planning support, we're pretty solid on these numbers. We believe that these will hold throughout the process till when we get up to March for adoption. So you see those different categories there. The traffic data program, we're reducing that substantially. It just has not been subscribed recently in the past few years. We've had some presentations about this at staff meetings to try to get folks interested in it, but there really has been no interest. So we're reducing that line item rather substantially. General traffic counts will remain the same. That supports the model in a substantial way. The land use or the community model or the community viz tool, that number is based upon an estimate provided by Centralina. The Metrolina regional model, that is the total amount. They receive both PL and Section 5303 money. And for GIS analysis and database, just a minor increase from the current fiscal year. For the other task codes for the UPWP, keeping that steady, and that's been steady for a number of years. Transportation Improvement Program, again, steady with what we've done for the past couple of years. Special studies, that's a relatively small amount there, but that reflects only the staff support for some of those special studies, and I'll get into those, what those other studies are shortly. For Title VI, a slight increase from the current fiscal year, and that's because, as you might remember, we adopted a new Title VI plan late last year, and so we'll be getting into an implementation phase next year. Environmental justice, that's remaining steady. A lot of EJ-related work will be baked into the RAISE grant and the SS4A grant next year. So it's not like our commitment to that is minimal. It's just that work is oftentimes associated with other activities. Public participation, that we might end up with a slight increase there. I do need to talk to Merritt and Judy more about what our needs will be next fiscal year. It might be a similar situation to environmental justice, where a lot of public involvement work is associated with the two grants. So we might be covered in those areas. And then statewide and extra regional planning, that's where we interact with other MPOs in the region, of the North Carolina MPO Association, not to mention the Association of MPOs, the national group. We've not been spending a lot in that category lately, so we're proposing a $15,000 decrease. And then finally, planning process and management operations. These are our two most complex task codes. They touch virtually all aspects of the organization in many respects. Under planning process is found the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, a lot of Jarrell's transit planning activities, performance-based planning, et cetera. And management operations, that truly touches everything we do as an organization, because you have to keep the entire organization running, and that's where we program the dollars for for those activities. So we really need to be looking at the first 2 quarters of the current fiscal year to see what the trends are before we make a final call on those numbers. We think the two you see there, 680,000 and 730,000, are reasonable at this point, but they really are placeholders. So we do need to do a little bit more work for both categories. Did want to talk briefly about the IIJA requirement, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You might recall from, I guess this is the 3rd year, there is a requirement in the IIJA that 2.5% of any MPO's PL dollars be devoted to, as you can see there on the screen, planning activities to increase safe and accessible options for multiple travel modes, et cetera. We interpret that largely as a complete streets type of activity. At least that's how we're applying the dollars. I shouldn't say interpretation, but that's how we apply the dollars. And our IIJA requirement this year is $44,800, and that money is programmed in the planning process task code, but it is called out as a separate line item as well. I mentioned the local planning projects earlier. There are 3 that are coming out of the discretionary grants program fall call. We were thinking that there would be action on this before the adoption of the UPWP in March, but it seems like the action will be delayed on the discretionary program until March. But there are 3 projects, Cornelius, Union County, and Central Ina Regional Council. We are assuming all projects in the UPWP development at this point, but we don't have official action from the board yet. But if history holds, they will be approved along with the other projects coming out of the fall call. In terms of next steps, we will complete the detailed task code allocations, hopefully by the end of the month or early February. We're working on document design, the task code descriptions, and the writing of text. We will be, as I mentioned earlier, assessing the first 2 quarters expenditures to see what the trends look like. We probably will have a transportation staff meeting in late January to go over what we hope are, if not final, pretty close to final allocations. And then we'll be bringing that second draft back to you and to the board in February. and then March adoption, and hopefully by then everything will have to be squared away by then. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the work program.
Thank you, Bob. All right, any questions? Okay,
Okay. Very good. Thank you, everyone.
thank you. All right, our next item, we're going to hear from Dana. Nope, where am I? Oh, God, I got to put my glasses on.
Will
See?
Snyder.
Thank you. Okay. Will, thank you. Performance-based planning, 2025 safety targets.
Thank you. Good morning. Will Snyder, planner from the CRTPO. This is an annual process that we undertake, the performance-based safety targets. So I'll be previewing the 2025 targets. Again, this is an information item. We'll be coming back for consent in February. So first, I'm going to go through the purpose of the annual adoption process, what defines the safety targets as part of the federal and state requirements, the NCDOT proposed safety targets for this calendar year, how we as the CRTPO are addressing safety now and moving forward, and then our staff recommendation and next steps, again, moving into February adoption of these targets. So first and foremost, again, as I mentioned, this is part of a federal and state requirement under FHWA. That program is called the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It's a federal program that establishes this process nationally, where every state and or every MPO is required to create and adopt some form of safety targets. In North Carolina, NCDOT achieves that through the NC Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And we as the CRTPO are pretty much given the option under federal law to either endorse the state targets or create our own targets. And so currently the CRTPO reviews the NCDOT targets and essentially endorses or adopts those. So those targets are based on 5 different measures. That is the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities per 100 million VMT, the number of serious injuries, and then the rate of serious injuries per 100 million VMT, and then the number of combined non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries. So essentially our vulnerable users that are not traveling in some sort of a vehicle. So as part of NCDOT's plan, these are, again, those performance measures on the left-hand side. What I'm showing you here are the previous calendar year 2024 targets, and then the proposed 2025 targets. So as part of NCDOT's plan, they are annually seeking a reduction in these targets, as we probably should be seeking a reduction in fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways throughout the state. And so you'll see that the number of fatalities, you're seeing a reduction of a little over 48. For rate of fatalities, you're seeing a reduction of about 4.2%. Then number of serious injuries, a reduction a little over 107. And then that rate being a reduction of about 9.2%. And then our vulnerable user number of fatalities and serious injuries at about 16.5 of a reduction. So currently, I'm going to talk about how the CRTPO addresses safety today. We do so through our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Tier 1 component of that is that about a quarter of our overall MTP project scoring points go towards safety. We also do so through the discretionary grants program. So when we are receiving applications, if it's a bike ped application, we are typically seeking documented safety challenges, human exposure reduction, traffic calming measures, and overall vehicle traffic volumes. So that's part of the application for a bike ped project. For roadway and intersection projects, we're seeking the 5-year crash total divided by that average annual daily traffic volume, and then also asking jurisdictions for any crash reduction factors incorporated as part of that roadway project so that their project may seek some additional points. So this today is how we systemically build safety into our current MPO processes. We've seen some general success, I would say, in terms of the types of projects that are coming out of this type of process, but we're seeking to push this a little bit further. So moving forward, we have a couple of opportunities that have either taken place or upcoming for improving safety. The first is the adoption of our complete streets policy at the MPO level that was adopted this past November. Here is an excerpt from that policy. Among some of the other elements the policy really focuses on related to safety, but it is that all new and existing roadway construction and reconstruction projects should comply with the complete streets policy unless that project receives an exception. So really trying to bake that into a policy where we have that expectation of the types of projects that are being submitted to programs such as our discretionary program moving forward to achieve better safety through complete streets design. The other element is our comprehensive safety action plan. So this is being funded through our Safe Streets for All award that we were awarded this past September. That is going to establish an MPO safety target methodology internally to the CRTPO, one of many tasks that we'll be seeking out of that plan. And so as I just mentioned, we either have the option to endorse NCDOT's targets or create our own at the CRTPO level. It's a very burdensome process, and today we don't have the data system to do that. And so with this very large grant fund, we're going to seek to create that system and really set targets that are realistic for what our region is currently dealing with, being a mostly urban region. The targets are statewide, so we're representing all the way out to the mountains, to the Piedmonts, to the coast. And so to really hone those targets into what our urban area is dealing with is a little bit more context sensitive to safety here. Then finally, the RAISE-funded program, Making Our Roads Safer, led by Brian Elgort. So that process will be identifying transportation safety risk for our more vulnerable populations in the planning area and ultimately implement crash reduction factors with about a 20% design phase towards the end of that project. So these are the ways that moving forward, in addition to the MTP and discretionary grants program, we're really trying to program safety into more of the processes that we are doing today. And so our staff recommendation is that this year, the TCC recommend to the board that the board adopt the NCDOT targets for calendar year 2025, again, because we are working in the future to set up the systems to be able to create our own. So in the meantime, we would like to continue endorsing the targets as part of the federal and state requirement. That is something that we have to do as the MPO. So we'll continue to do so really until, again, our safety action plan can establish that plan for us. And as I've said, we've historically lacked those resources, and we're seeking some new opportunities to create those systems for us in the future. So again, providing you that information this month. We'll also provide this to the board next week, and then we will seek consent from both you and the board in February. I want to preview that action for you as well, and that is that we'll recommend that the CRTPO board support the NCDOT's 2025 safety targets as part of the implementation of our federally required performance-based planning requirements. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Will. Questions?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Dave Campbell, the bicycle focus area. Can you go back to your slide with the safety action plan?
Sure.
Bullets you had on there. My question is, with that plan, do you think you could, let's see how to ask this question. We've got our targets for next year for a reduction in fatalities, serious injuries. Could the plan that you're going to be working on give us a more forward-looking, in 5 years, here's where we'd like to get to, or every year, here's where we'd like to get to? And could it include things like, if we made this change region-wide, we would expect these reduction in numbers. And if we made that change, we would see those reduction in numbers. I've seen this sort of thing when it comes to pollution reduction for regions that are not in attainment. And so decision makers, leadership, elected officials could see, if we did this, the pollution levels would drop this amount towards our goals. And if we did that, pollution would drop. I'm wondering if we could do the same thing with safety going forward beyond just a 1-year outlook.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, so there's a couple different things that we'll be doing as part of this plan. The first would be to establish the system to overall take the targets more locally and create new targets to adopt for each following calendar year. So again, it's on things like a 5-year rolling average. To really be able to hone that into our planning area would be really that key first step, because right now it's statewide. And as I've said, the general context of the state is very different maybe from what we're dealing with here in the more urbanized part of the Charlotte region. So that would be the first step, is to set up the safety data system. The next part I would say is absolutely seeking priority projects that would help immediately reduce targets such as our rate of fatalities and serious injuries. So as part of a typical safe streets planning process, you're going through that analysis process and then identifying a list of priority projects that you immediately want to seek funding for, whether that's with short-term pilot projects, if it's just paint on the ground and some flex posts to really try to reduce the exposure to vulnerable populations, versus more permanent capital projects, multi-million-dollar type improvements. If that answers your question, that's how we would hyper-localize it, is to give our jurisdictions.
I think you're too hyper-localizing it for me.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not thinking just of projects. Yeah, we do want to know how projects improve safety, but maybe it's more policy. Like
Sure.
if we had the ability region-wide to lower speed limits to 20 miles an hour or 15 miles an hour in certain zones, we would see this change regionally towards our goals. I'm just kind of making this up off the top of my head. Any other sort of policy or programming type stuff?
The planning
higher
process
level than projects.
Yeah, without going too much into what our plan is seeking to do, because we're still hashing some of the details out there, there is a policy review component. So this is absolutely not just focused on built infrastructure. There would be a review of the effectiveness of our complete streets policy, for example. By the time the plan is finished, it's going to be a couple of years since our complete streets policy has been adopted. So we can evaluate programs such as that. It'll be an evaluation of all of our fixed current federally required programs, such as the MTP process, the discretionary program, our CTP. It will be a policy review just as much as a built, infrastructure type review as well. Okay. Thanks for your question.
Any further questions? Go ahead.
I really like what Dave was getting at in terms of talking about the types of activities that would move the needle, because in the agenda packet, it gave our status in terms of accomplishment from the previous cycle, which was failure. And that's been a recurring theme for the 10 years that this has been a requirement. I mean, our numbers have gotten worse, which is not unique to us. And so it's frustrating that we set these targets, but we don't have authority over what kind of cars people drive or how they drive or where they live and the roads they take, which plays a huge role in the crash rates. And so giving some perspective on, how things have gone, and then the types of activities that are truly necessary to change things. Like if we took the 100 worst intersections in our region and designed them to the best safety standards, what would that do? Those types of decisions, I think, would give perspective, because right now it sounds like we're doing good things, and honestly, we're not, in terms of really changing the trend.
Absolutely.
Well, if I could just add to that, the pollution example I was giving you, they would also include things we can't control. Like at the state level, if this change was made, that the body that was seeing this chart didn't have the authority to do, we would expect these changes. And that was helpful. That put it in perspective. Or if the federal level, that change was made. And so I think it helped focus local decision making. Don't just hope the state does this or the feds do that. Here's what they can do, but here's what we can do here to move the needle.
I would say that's absolutely part of the process that we'll be undertaking, is being realistic with what we as an MPO can do. We don't have enforcement power, but again, through things like our complete streets policy and an expansion maybe of that type of work, we would seek that type of improvement.
Any more questions or discussion? Thank you. And Will, that brings us to our next item. And I think some of the questions and discussions that we just had are actually going to start to be things that we'll be able to answer through this next effort. So give us an update on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I will move right into project development update on our Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. So as a refresher, we were awarded a little over $3 million this past September to develop a comprehensive safety action plan. This is the largest planning award out of this program in North Carolina. So we're super proud and very excited of what this infusion of safety funding will do for our region. And so the board adopted a resolution supporting this application back during the May 2024 board meeting. And again, we were ultimately awarded those funds. The application materials we were able to develop in-house. Really, as our MPO has grown in staffing, we've really had the ability to go after some of these more rigorous applications. And we also, as part of that process, received a $500,000 local match subsidy provided by NCDOT. As you may recall, in previous presentations, probably mid to late last year, as part of the local match, we're allowed to either pursue your traditional cash match, your 20%, or an in-kind match using staff time, local resources, and the like. And so we're using a mix of in-kind as well as this NCDOT subsidy to offset that burden a little bit further on our jurisdictions. So we'll have a little bit more information about what that looks like to make sure that that is something that we're able to support our jurisdictions with. So this process adopts the safe system approach. If you haven't heard of this before, this is a little bit of an evolution of kind of the 3E type safety approach, where you're looking at engineering, enforcement, and education. Here, we're actually looking more holistically at the transportation system as a system. So in having safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer roads, and post-crash care, you're achieving these core principles around the ring. And so I've listed those here so that you don't have to kind of crane your neck to read them. But those are that humans make mistakes, humans are vulnerable, responsibility is shared, safety is proactive, redundancy is crucial, and ultimately that death and serious injuries are unacceptable. So it's the idea that in achieving these center kind of core ideas, you're able to acknowledge that mistakes are made on our roadways. So how can our roadway network really respond to that and make sure that if you're going to be in a crash, how are you the safest you can be, again, avoiding injuries or serious injuries or fatalities? As an example, and in North Carolina, we suffer quite a bit from serious injuries and fatalities. This is a 5-year period from 2019 to 2023. We saw just about 571,000 injuries on our roadways and a little over 8,000, or I should say 8,300 fatalities on our roadways. And I'll zoom in because I think the chart kind of scaled itself specifically to our fatality number. So again, deaths and serious injuries being unacceptable, we have quite a bit of work to do in North Carolina, and especially in the Charlotte region, thinking about how we're contributing to these statewide numbers. Really haven't implemented the safe systems approach on a region-wide network here in the Charlotte region. And so that's what this planning process will really hope to do, is to really push these numbers down as much as possible. And so again, we're adopting that national roadway safety strategy, one of those strategies being the safe system approach to reduce and eliminate those numbers. And in doing that, we'll deliver a planning area-wide comprehensive safety action plan. We will support our jurisdictions with their existing planning efforts, as well as help jurisdictions today that do not have a plan, provide them with some sort of recommendation list, very collaboratively, certainly working to understand local safety needs, and ultimately deliver some recommendations. And then any supplemental planning support that we can provide as part of our overall fund. So we will really ultimately then be providing all of our members with a pathway to seek capital funding aimed at reducing injuries and fatalities through infrastructure improvements, maybe even some policy recommendations too, as the earlier discussion was pointing at. So we have quite a bit of work currently taking place in our planning area. A little over $5 million has been awarded to our member jurisdictions since the Safe Streets program kicked off. And so super excited for the types of work that'll be coming out of a lot of these very recent awards for the most part. And so we look forward to working with these and our many other jurisdictions. So an overall timeline here. So we have our FHWA draft grant agreement that we're hashing through right now, really trying to push ourselves to a procurement stage, hopefully around this summer. As a reminder, I've made a couple announcements in like a TSM type environment. We have our staff focus group to work through the scope of work, kicking off after the February TCC starting at 12 o'clock. And so we'll really take the opportunity to codify the collaboration that we would like to have with all of our members in that scope through this workshop process. We'll be doing that over a couple of different months and different sessions, reviewing the scope, providing you all an opportunity to provide feedback, and then just hashing through some of those revisions following that. Okay. Again, here's kind of the general focus of that staff focus group. So feel free to scan this QR code if you haven't registered for that focus group already. This is open to jurisdiction staff, NCDOT. We have NC Vision Zero joining us, and we're very excited to really make this as best of a plan as it can be with everyone's input in this process. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Will. All right, any questions? All right,
Excellent.
Dana, now it's your turn. So we're going to hear from Dana and Heather on a 2026-2035 STIP project removal.
Okay, I am too short for this podium. Okay, I'm staying on my tiptoes, so hopefully everyone can see me. I'm Dana Stujanki with Town of Matthews, and I am going to give a very similar presentation for the that I gave a couple weeks ago during staff meeting. So for those, it may be new for some of you, but others it will be a repeat. So we're talking about removing John Street from the STIP. That's U4714AA. And I want to tell everyone a little bit of Matthews. Hopefully everyone's been there. We are in the southeast corner of Mecklenburg County. We have a fun little downtown, and that's really important because this project goes right through the heart of our town. And we have a lot of cool things going on in our downtown. We've got an elementary school. We've got lots of interesting shops and restaurants. We have lots of pedestrian traffic. And so we want to make sure that everything we design for our downtown, including our infrastructure, is appropriate. So we've got these 4 vision statements up here. We've got 12 for the town, but these are the first 4. And it's really fun to work in a community where the vision of the town, the elected officials and the residents really love what I do every day, which is great. So we really want a well-planned multimodal transportation system. So multimodal, right? Every mode is equal. We want a vibrant, friendly downtown, and that's a really, really important statement, especially with this John Street project. We really want that pedestrian-friendly downtown feel. Vision 3 is walkable, bikeable community. And Vision 4 is having a small town feel. And having a small town feel, again, is creating a infrastructure that promotes that and that is in alignment with that. Where is this project? So the project as a whole is 8 miles. It's really long. It starts at Trade Street, goes all the way into Indian Trail. And we are discussing the AA section, which is just the red section on the map. And that is something we divided this into the AA section so that we could have everything on the other side of 45 continue along with NCDOT to create what was needed out there. So, there's a very different context between the red section and the green and blue section. And so that's why the design needed to be different for the AA section. So I'm going to give you a history lesson. I'm going to stand over here. Oh, maybe you guys can't hear me. How about this way? So I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson for this project. We've got
Microphone.
Oh, is there? Can you guys hear me? Okay, that's much better. I can just do it from here. Thank you. Okay, so we've got John Street history lesson. So 2009, I didn't work for the town. the town submitted this project, and I assume it was in collaboration with NCDOT because clearly we didn't submit a project for Union County. But we were part of this project submittal, and in the past 15 years, things have changed. Things have, evolved. In 2013, this project actually got funded. So, 2013, things kick off and designs start happening. In 2017, internal staff recognized that there were some conflicts in the downtown area, and they really wanted to take a deeper dive into those designs. And the board actually allowed us to hire VHB to do some design option studies. And the design options, when it started reaching out to the public, there was concern and people were like, whoa, what's going on here? That, I don't know how much public engagement happened in 2009. Again, I wasn't there. So when VHB came on board and the board started realizing that there was, concern, they took another step back and they said, okay, let's create a town's working group and made up of business leaders, of residents, of other stakeholders to really understand what the community wants. And so VHB's design work was abandoned and we moved on to this town's working group to get lots and lots of input, public engagement. My first day of employment was the last day of the last working group meeting. So I just sort of sat and watched that last meeting. I did live in town, so I knew what was going on, but I was just, that was when I began my work with the town of Matthews. And so after that working group wrapped up, the two main takeaways were we don't want a 4-lane section. We want 1 lane in each direction with a median and turn lanes. That was, and it wanted it to be a complete street. And in addition, we realized that we had to section off the AA section and let NCDOT continue on with everything outside 45. And so in 2019, I worked with Scott Cole at the time, and we worked really hard to create a rational termini, and everyone was in agreement that 45, we could do that break. And we came in front of you all and said, hey, we really need a delay in this. We didn't ask, to pull it off the step. We said, we need a delay. We want to work this, see if we can work this out with NCDOT. And the biggest thing that we were dealing with at the time is we thought 5 major projects were going to happen before John Street. Those 5 projects, because of the pandemic and the hurricanes, they haven't been successfully implemented. They're in progress, but they haven't been successfully implemented. So that is US 74, the widening project, the parallel routes. We've got McKee Road, that's a new alignment, and that's just getting kicked off. Actually, construction starts, I think, this month. We've got the Weddington Interchange, which, again, was supposed to be completed, and it's hopefully going to be completed next summer, or this coming summer. We've got 485 and that the widening there, and that hasn't been completed. It's obviously in progress, and that'll happen and hopefully open to the public soon. And then we had NC 51 widening. So we have all these infrastructure projects that we're expecting, and we're hoping will be additional creating a network of roads to create around town so that you don't need to get through downtown. Like you can go around town and not necessarily through our downtown as through traffic. And so our board really didn't want to do anything to John Street until all of this other infrastructure was created. We didn't want to sacrifice our downtown. So with that said, we have been working all along with with NCDOT, trying to create other sections that could potentially work in town, and we weren't able to come to an agreement. I threw these up here just to show that we've had a really good working relationship with NCDOT. We just couldn't. They wanted to do a 4-lane, and we just couldn't have that happen in our downtown. So what did we do? We tried to be proactive. In 2020, we did a sub-area model. We said, okay, the writing's on the wall. NCDOT really wants to keep with these 4 lanes, and we want to show that doing a 2-lane is not going to break the network. And so we created with you all helped us get the funds through the PL process with CRTPO to help pay for the sub-area model. We worked with Martin and the model team. And, right now the model is 12 counties. And we did a sub-area model for our one town. And so we were able to create much more TAZs in our model. So right now in that Metro Atlanta regional model, for the town of Matthews, there's 20 TAZs. For our model, it was 120. So we were able to create all these other TAZs to load traffic on very specific streets that they can't capture in the MRM. And I mean, the MRM wouldn't be able to run if they did every street for, you know, every county. So we were able to show that while there's still delay in the future year on John Street, in the sub-area model, it doesn't break the network if we don't do a 4-lane. So with that, we did 2 other major studies. We did a comp plan that included that downtown master plan and the John Street PED bike study, you know, really to get to the point where we are now, which is to try to get the STIP, to get the project removed at the STIP. So just to step back for a sec, talk about the downtown master plan and the bike ped plan. You know, we saw this increased footprint of commercial use over the past 15 years. More and more people have love to hang out in downtown Matthews. I mean, we have lots and lots of activities going on. So we've got 77 events in our downtown a year. So you can do the math. Every weekend, we got something going on downtown. We have on John Street and Trade, our main intersection, on any given weekend, at least 1,000 people, pedestrians walking across that road. So this is a very urban little intersection. This is not a suburban intersection where there's 5 people crossing the road. This is, you know, we need to make sure we're providing safety for all modes. And then we've got this jaywalking problem where we are not planning to build a big wall to try to prevent jaywalking. We are trying to create an environment where we can get people across mid-block crossings safely. So 2024, we just adopted the bike ped plan. And so again, we are, you know, CRTPO helped us pay for, with PL dollars for the bike ped plan. And this was really great. We worked with Kittleson, and in the current configuration of John Street, we went through with Kittleson where we should put crossings, where we should create, you know, different things to do so that we can make sure that up and down the corridor and across the corridor, bicycles and pedestrians can cross safely. And so we're really proud of this study. And we basically took this study and and the concepts that came out of the work group and are trying to now apply for a RAISE grant. And so that's something we're actively working on now because, you know, we just, back in November, the board decided not to move forward with this project. And the RAISE grant is happening right now. Like, we have to apply by the end of this month. So that's something we're doing to try to create more opportunities for us. This is the letter, quotes from the letter from our mayor to NCDOT, to Brett Knipe, about why the board has decided to ask for this removal. The first quote is basically saying, look, we have all this other infrastructure coming, and we don't want to blow out our, you know, our downtown John Street in order to, we want to, you know, make sure that we don't have to do that. We want to see what all these other projects will, you know, what those traffic patterns are going to be in terms of, you know, merging, so that we don't have to do that to John Street. We have tried, we've tried very hard to work with NCDOT, and unfortunately they have not been able to maneuver around the idea where the 4-lane, the purpose of need is a 4-lane road. And even though we're 1/8 of the total project of U 4714, they're unwilling to change that for the last, you know, less than a mile of road. So, you know, because the design couldn't change, we just couldn't accept that design. And we also, the mayor felt that, you know, look, there's only 25 million in the STIP. If we really did the widening, I think NCDOT said it was going to be more like 47 million. So we clearly, that project cost right now in the STIP is way under. And I think the mayor's heard lots about value engineering, was like, why don't we just value engineer this and, you know, whittle down the project in the concept of 3-lane concept. But again, unfortunately, NCDOT wasn't willing to do that. So we basically now we're asking, you know, this is for information only, but, you know, we're asking at some point to have this removed officially off the STIP. And, you know, for us, for those next steps, it's going to be, you know, we're applying for the RAISE grant, like I said, and we are moving forward, going to expand our purpose and needs statement. So I know we're going to have a workshop after this meeting for those folks who are going to stay in the to talk about the MTP. But I think we all need to really pay attention to what we put in as our purpose and needs statements, because if you just say you just want to widen something and you don't put in the context of that, like we also want to, create a better opportunities and for the environment, or for all modes, or for economic development. If we can expand those purpose and need statements, perhaps me and Heather wouldn't be in the position we're in, asking for the step to to be changed. So I know you all probably you've heard this before. I'm happy to answer questions, but that's what we're asking for today. Go ahead.
I just want to confirm something that we heard at the staff meeting when you brought this up, that, and Sean, if you want to confirm that DOT is on board with this.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any more? Oh, go ahead, James.
So that was a lot of information, Dana. I just have a few questions. I'm supportive of this. But I just want to get some clarification if you can help me through it. You mentioned some historic context. Was that related to just the history of the project, or did you also have some historical buildings that could be impacted with the widening project?
In terms of, we have, downtown Matthews has some historic buildings. I don't know. I mean, CJ's here, so I'm not sure if it actually touched any historic buildings. The alignment. Is that the question? If it's touched historic buildings? Do you know if it? This is CJ O'Neill, who's our department.
Hey, everybody. CJ O'Neill, Town of Matthews Public Works Director. There are historic buildings there. There is one immediately adjacent to the widening, but they were moving the widening to one side to miss that building, so that would not be impacted.
Okay, perfect. And just a few more questions pertaining to safety, congestion, and funding. So first off, safety, it sounds like, you've definitely done your homework with your bike and ped study. It sounds like this particular portion of the STIP project could hinder your pedestrian focused goals. So as far as safety, is there any concerns by removing this project, are there any safety concerns that you foresee?
I mean, I feel like we are looking at all the goals, not just volume capacity. Like, it's not just about congestion. I pulled some numbers, and I think we have a speeding issue here. So while there's congestion, we have speeding, especially in our core downtown. So we have a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and through the bike ped study, we were looking at speeds, and it's consistently 38 miles an hour. And we all know that with pedestrian fatalities, if you are going 20 miles an hour, you have a 15% chance of surviving. If you are going 45 miles an hour, you have a 15% chance of death. No, wait, that's wrong. It's flipped. Sorry. You have a 95% chance of dying. I can't remember, but it's pretty significant. Like, we want everyone to slow down. Like, we want, our concern is we want slower speeds to that whole corridor. So.
Perfect.
Do you want to?
Sorry, did that answer your question?
Overall, yes. So it sounds like by not doing the 4 lanes and focusing more on the pedestrian rather than the vehicle in your downtown area, that will help to improve safety.
Yeah,
that's correct.
And then through the use of this East John Street study and your additional findings, you'll be able to better improve that, assuming you get the RAISE grant awarded.
Yes, that's our plan.
And then the second question was regarding congestion. So you made mention of other projects that are programmed, such as the I-45, 74, NC-51, McKee Road, Weddington Interchange, et cetera. So through your sub-area model or through your traffic modeling, did you find that you can still accommodate for the traffic even with removing this project or this portion?
Yes, and we are comfortable in our downtown with more congestion than perhaps NCDOT is. I mean, we see that as a very urban space, and it functions differently than a suburban space. And so we want those speeds to be lower, and we're okay with some level of congestion. So.
Okay. And last question is funding, and this may be a DOT or CRTPO question. Assuming that the CRTPO board removes this portion, what happens with those funding dollars that would have been allocated to this portion of the project?
They would get put back into the STIP and whatever tier they came from.
Does it say in this division?
If that was that would have been a division needs tier project. So yes, it would.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Try this mic as well. Yeah, so Dana and I are presenting back to back because we have a very similar project. Our project is on Gilead Road in downtown Huntersville, and I'll kind of walk you through the history of the project progression and some of the planning efforts and public engagement efforts that have informed our decision to request it be removed from the STIP. So just to put this in some context, I always like to highlight our town's vision to make Huntersville the most livable community in North Carolina, with a focus on prioritizing quality of life, green spaces, environmental safety, meaningful economic development, and a multimodal transportation network. This project is in the heart of our downtown. Huntersville is just north of Charlotte, and this project is east of I-77 that kind of bisects our town. And then highlighted in green on the right, you can see the extent of the project is just east of US Highway 21, all the way down to our main intersection at NC 115 or Old Statesville Highway. So this is a long timeline, kind of parallel timelines of the progression through the STIP process, as well as the Huntersville planning efforts, and then the designing efforts there in the middle in yellow. So this project was listed on MUMPO's long-range plan in 2006 and was submitted to P 1.0 in 2010 with a cost estimate of $6 million. And along a parallel to that, Huntersville was going through a Gilead Road and US 21 Transportation and Land Use Vision Small Area Plan. And then subsequent to that was our first downtown plan in 2011. The 2006 Huntersville plan recommended maintaining Gilead Road as a 2-lane road. And the 2011 plan called for a context-sensitive design. And at that time, the STIP project was not funded yet. But then in P 3.0 in 2015, it was programmed for construction in 2014. Shortly before that, in 2014, we had a subsequent downtown transportation system plan where we began to evaluate some of the options for redesigning Gilead Road. And we looked at the right-of-way impacts of several different cross sections for the road and found that a 4-lane road, which would be by definition what the STIP project would have multiple property impacts. Fast forward in 2017, NCDOT started going through the preliminary design process and evaluating the traffic impacts of various designs. They landed on the 4-lane road with a median. Currently, the road is 3 lanes, a middle turn lane, and bike lanes. So the purpose and needs of the project was defined as widening for capacity. So 4 lanes was really the only option. In 2018, there was an updated cost estimate. Now it's at 15.6 million. And then fast forward to 2020 with all the budgetary constraints that you guys are familiar with, the project got paused. And around just before it was paused, we had landed on a level of service D design. We had evaluated about 9 or 10 different scenarios, quad right turns. We had some parallel projects going on Main Street that were evaluating roundabouts to the north and south versus signalized intersections. So we went through a lot of different scenarios trying to find a design that would improve the congestion at the main intersection of 115. This is an aerial photo of the current conditions. And this is the level of service D design with some roundabouts at Commerce Center Drive and at Sherwood Drive, and then a signalized intersection wonder if my pointer works. This is 115. This is the main intersection of concern where the congestion is, was being evaluated. These are the buildings that this design would impact. So when they landed on this design, they found that there's 2 houses right there by the roundabout that would have to be removed. Our town hall, which is here, would be impacted. Our town center over here would be impacted. And this at the time was our police department. It's now a brewery. And then on the right, a great transition. And then to the far right is a restaurant. This is the intersection, a close-up of the intersection highlighting the impacts to our town hall building here, town center here, and the brewery building here. Close up on the roundabout that takes out 2 houses to the south. Okay, so I think I just want to go back here, that bottom right, 2021. While the project was paused, the town began a downtown master plan and went through a series of meetings. We had a very robust steering committee that met over a year during those COVID years. And I brought this in here to highlight the #1 recommendation that came out of that downtown plan is that Gilead Road not be widened and that it be designed as a multimodal street. The focus on that recommendation was in direct response to this image being shown to our steering committee. So this became the focus of our downtown steering committee's planning efforts and was highlighted at all of our public input meetings and became a point of contention for how to move forward with this project. So the project was then unpaused, if you will, in 2022. We continued to do a series of traffic analyses, both as part of the downtown plan and working with Martin and the MRM group. Evaluating some parallel routes that were identified during the downtown plan. None of these provided any more level of service improvements at the intersection. And given the priority of that #1 recommendation that Gilead Road not be widened, we began to work with NCDOT, similar in the way that Dana described with the Matthews project, evaluating and asking whether the STIP funds could be applied to any other scenario, whether building a parallel route that we had evaluated as the downtown plan or doing a modernization plan or project. But the final conclusion was same as Matthews, that this project was scored as a widening project, and without widening the project, the funds cannot be applied. We wanted to know, could we just do an intersection project without the widening along the corridor? And none of that is an option. So on this past December 3rd, our board passed a resolution to remove the Gilead Road project from the STIP. And we're just here for information today. We'll present to you guys for action next month. In the meantime, we have employed a consultant to evaluate an different intersection treatment at 115 and Gilead Road, perhaps a mini roundabout. We've employed Dan Burden, who's a consultant with the Blue Zones. And we are looking for options that not only address the congestion at the intersection, but also looking to address the other main goals of our vision for downtown. So economic development, pedestrian access and safety, quality of life in general, and not impacting those, 5 or 6 buildings right there in the heart of our downtown. And I just thought I'd give you a little preview of some of the preliminary designs. I guess I don't have any more slides. We're going to be exploring DA funds or similar federal funding grant opportunities safe streets for all, that type of thing, to look at ways of reducing the speeds, the design speed of the corridor, rather than widening it and at the risk of inducing more traffic that would come to the same congested intersection. So I welcome any questions y'all have. Yeah.
Heather, can you say more about the businesses that are on the street? Do they sort of mirror what you shared with us today, or do they have specific goals or?
So we had a robust engagement prior to my employment with the town. One of the downtown plans, I think the 2011 plan, had a really robust survey of all the businesses along the corridor. And there, that was the one that asked for a context-sensitive design that we think is lacking in the STIP design project. But we have a post office, an elementary school, a number of burgeoning businesses. We just approved a new business yesterday at our town board meeting, or 2 days ago. So our downtown is growing, and access both along the corridor and across the corridor is a main concern of those business owners.
Would they say a widened road would also be good? Like
No, I
either
mean,
one is good?
many of those business owners were on the downtown steering committee,
Okay.
and they absolutely do not want the road widened.
Interesting.
Any other, go ahead, James.
Hey, Heather. So while I'm not against this, I do have a little bit more concerns with this proposal to remove than the Matthews proposal. So maybe you can help walk me through that a little bit better. So with this proposal, how far along are you with the alternative design that you showed to still address those safety and congestion needs when this project is removed?
So we just have preliminary designs, and we're looking to fund in the next year a corridor analysis and advancing that design further. We also are looking at parallel route improvements through some downtown development projects that are currently underway.
Okay. And this seems like it aligns with your downtown plan, your adopted plans, what the property owners want. And you're progressing a plan to move along to address those other needs. So I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. All right. Any further questions for Heather? Well, thank you both for sharing all that detail with us. I hope members around the table see the benefit and value in working with the CRTPO and having access to a lot of additional resources through the MRM modeling that you guys are both working, or you did and you're working on now. So just a great example of how we can all work together to advance transportation. All right, now we're going to hear from Neil Burke and Allison Flewitt. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. Neil Burke here. I'm the project manager on the CRTPO side for the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. And then with me this morning, we also have Allison Flewitt. So she's with Kimley Horn, and she's the project manager on the consultant side. So as much as I hate to say it, this is a little more of a substantial update for you all. I know it's already a long meeting. We'll do our best to move through the material quickly, but still that you can understand what we're doing. The reason why it's substantial is it's the first meeting of the year, but also we started the planning process for the 2055 MTP in the spring of last year and really kind of got some momentum going. But 2025, there'll be a series of actions coming before the TCC as well as the CRTPO board. So really this presentation is designed to give you all a preview of what's coming up and just expose you to what we're going to be working on with all of you over the next couple of months. So I'll cover at a high level the roadway project submission process, and we're going to go over this in a little more detail in the workshop. And then Allison is going to cover the roadway revenue projections, the congestion management process, outcomes of the land use scenario planning, and then I'll wrap up with some next steps. So this is a schedule of what we anticipate coming over 2025. Again, we began the planning process in the spring of 2024. The MTP is due to FHWA in April of 2026. So we have a rather rigid schedule, but we started the scenario planning process. You'll hear an update as to some of those initial outcomes. So that's happening in the first quarter. We have developed a revenue forecast for roadway projects. Allison will provide an update on that today. We're still working with the 4 transit agencies to develop the transit operating and capital revenue forecasts. We anticipate that to wrap up in the first quarter of this year. We started the congestion management process last year, and that was on the heels of a CMP task force that Kendall Clanton on our staff led. Several of you were involved with that. Now we're in the process of setting up the congested corridors for analysis. And then project evaluation, that's really the focus of the workshop this afternoon. We'll have a little more detail in this presentation. And then obviously we have 2 phases of public engagement coming up. The second phase there, really the first phase of 2025 in the summer, that'll be the draft fiscally constrained roadway project list, really the outcome of the roadway project evaluation that we're going to be having the workshop about this afternoon. And then the third phase there in the fall of 2025, that'll be the draft report that we're going to be seeking resident and your jurisdiction's feedback on before we get into the adoption phase, which will occur in the first quarter of 2026. And obviously, we'll start working on preparing the 2055 MTP document this summer, and then moving into that third phase of public engagement in the fall. So moving into the roadway project submission process, again, we're having the workshop following this meeting. There will be lunch provided. We anticipate starting probably around noon today. The purpose of it is to provide an overview of the process and walk project submitters through the website that we'll be using to submit roadway projects. That window will open next Monday, January 13th, for submitters to submit candidate roadway projects, and it will close on Valentine's Day, Friday, February 14th. And then, as I mentioned, we will have a public comment period. That's really the outcome of that after we've applied fiscal constraint to that draft roadway project list in the summer of 2025. So an overview of the criteria. The criteria is used to prioritize roadway projects that have been submitted by our member jurisdictions for consideration in the 2055 MTP. We are using the 2050 MTP criteria as a starting point. Reason why is we made some substantial changes to that to allow an equitable access criteria in Tier 2 with the 2050 MTP. And then we're also making a significant change by allowing member jurisdictions to submit significant intersection and interchange projects. That's something we haven't done in the past, and we want to make sure that when we introduce something like that, that we're providing an apples to apples comparison in the scoring of corridor projects as opposed to scoring of intersection projects. And then fiscal constraint, this is the process where we look at all the anticipated revenues coming from the STIP based upon the 2026 through 2035 STIP, and then we project that out to 2055. And we're really doing that to ensure that there's available funding to complete the projects that we've evaluated. So every project that's submitted will develop a planning level cost estimate, and then we'll have our anticipated revenue. And that's really at a high level what we're doing with fiscal constraint. The steering committee has met several times to review the MTP criteria. The advisory committee has seen it once. They will see this again at their meeting next week, but the steering committee is not recommending significant changes to the criteria itself. They are endorsing the allowance of intersection and interchange projects for evaluation in the 2055 MTP. Many of you are familiar with the funnel. We've been using this process since 2013 with the 2040 MTP. And this is really designed to do 2 things. First of all, it's designed to reflect our regional priorities here. And that's where you see the Tier 2 criteria, all of the different qualitative impacts, such as environmental justice. I've mentioned equitable access, community resources, historic resources. And then the second thing that this is designed to do, and this is primarily in Tier 1, but also Tier 2, is to identify competitive projects that will score well in NCDOT's prioritization process. And that's where you see the safety, the congestion, accessibility to employment. Even within Tier 2, benefit cost is a significant portion of that. Because again, the end game in this is to get projects funded through the STI criteria. And again, this was developed in 2013. We've made some enhancements along the way, but generally I feel like this criteria is doing what it's intended to do in terms of reflecting our priorities, but also getting us funding for roadway projects and roadway projects that have complete streets elements to them within the scope. So moving into the schedule here, in March, we're going to begin the evaluation of Tier 1. Again, that's the quantitative measure within the funnel. We're going to be reviewing those Tier 1 scores with a subcommittee of the advisory committee and establishing a Tier 2 cutoff based upon those scores and the estimated costs. Moving into April, we're going to be using that subcommittee to help us evaluate those projects within Tier 2 based upon those criteria to measure the sustainability. We'll assign and review those Tier 2 scores, and then May, we're anticipating applying fiscal constraint, again, based upon the Tier 2 scores and the horizon year anticipated revenue. And then in June, we're anticipating the draft fiscally constrained project list to come before the TCC and the board. And the recommendation will be to release that draft project list for public comment. Again, that second phase of public engagement in the summer of 2025. I covered a lot there in a short amount of time. We have a lot to still cover. So if you don't mind, we'll hold questions to the end, unless anyone has any burning questions before I turn it over to Allison. Okay.
All right, thanks, Neil. I think I'll stand over here. All right, so I'm going to move us into the roadway financial forecast. So as Neil said, there are several elements to our revenue development. And I think something just to kind of preface all of this is that this is one of the biggest requirements of the metropolitan transportation planning process. Obviously, we have to have a fiscally constrained plan, and we have to develop revenue estimates for all of our travel modes. So we're kind of diving into this with our roadway funding forecast, but we'll ultimately be conducting this also for bicycle and pedestrian funding. Neil mentioned our public transportation forecasting is underway, as well as maintenance and MPO discretionary forecasting. So we wanted to give you a little bit of a perspective on some of our methodology for our roadway financial projections. This is something that is going to be brought before the board for adoption next month, so it's helpful to have some of this background prior to that time. So as we tried to be fairly consistent with this cycle over cycle, but then also just have an understanding of what's making sense and just kind of gut checking this each time. So we do look at the tip assumptions that have been provided to us by the NCDOT STIP unit. We coordinated with them early on in the process this time. And then also take a look at the population figures for our area. We find that population is a really strong indicator of our expected revenues. This is something that allows us to essentially allocate our funds based on our population share. There are a lot of STI-related geographies, I'll talk about that more in just a little bit, that we need to be sensitive to when we think about statewide available funds, regional and division level funds as well. We also need to think about the growth over time. This is a plan that goes all the way out till 2055. And so we have to kind of understand what we believe is going to be a reasonable expectation of those funds growing within that time period. So we did think about a 2% annual escalation rate. This is something that we discussed with NCDOT as feeling like a reasonable growth rate for our revenues. I'll note that we're talking about revenues only for that 2% rate. It's likely that when we're moving into our costs, that we're going to be looking at something greater than 2%. So getting into a few more of our assumptions for our roadway revenues. Right now, what I'm talking about is specific to roadway capital. We will be dealing with maintenance as a separate consideration. And we spend this time on roadway capital because this is the place where we're kind of taking it to the next step. Neil mentioned our workshop that we have later on today about the roadway project submissions. So we are going to be focusing ultimately on the fiscal constraint between these available capital revenues and those capital projects that are going to be submitted for consideration for the MTP. So when we think about the TIP funding that is currently available and try to understand how we might want to forecast that forward, we first have to think about what comprises that TIP funding currently. So any one-time revenue sources, for example, CARES Act, any grant funding, that's not something that we're going to be projecting forward. Also, any federal non-DOT funding that would be reflected in the TIP, but that's not something that we would assume to be carried forward and projected into the future. Other separate projections that are going to be happening as part of this process, but are not included in what we're showing you today, are local revenues and CRTPO discretionary funds. So as kind of setting some guideposts around what we're talking about, it's also helpful to think about the horizon years that we are going to be working with for the preparation of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So just for comparison, we have the horizon years that were used in the 2050 plan, and then what we're proposing here for the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Now you'll notice we actually have 2025 up there. The reason for that's inclusion is that we do have some committed projects for 2025. We just want to kind of memorialize those there in that year. But then from then on out, we have essentially 10-year cost bands that we'll be using 2035, 2045, and 2055. So our projects, we're not necessarily going to be assigning them a specific year. We're going to be kind of housing them within those particular cost bands. So I mentioned the STI categories. I think you all are very familiar with what we're talking about here, but this is important for us as we think about our revenue estimation, because we are working within the concepts of our statewide mobility funding sources, our regional, and also our division funding sources. And of course, for this area, we're talking about not only our overall statewide, but we have two different regions that are housed within CRTPO and two different divisions. So what's the big picture here? Obviously, when we're talking about forecasting, we're not forecasting anything within the years of the STIP. Anything that's in the STIP, we are essentially accepting as it is. That's what we have. We're reflecting that faithfully for those years that it's being reported. We are simply projecting beyond those years, so 2036 to 2055, and that gives us our total available dollars. Now, I mentioned those population estimates, and we start to see those divided up for our statewide funds, our individual regions, E and F, and divisions 10 and 12. Now, when we're talking about our population shares, this is not something we're just pulling out of a hat. We are using certified population numbers from the Office of State and Budget Management. So I'm just going to roll through these fairly quickly, but we did just want to give you a sense of what this looks like as we actually pull these out for the various different geographic components of the region. So for example, for our statewide mobility tier funds within the TIP, we have $40.4 billion assumed for the entire state of North Carolina and $6 billion assumed for CRTPO. So when we look at this, and this is actually for the totality of kind of getting out to 2055, we have this divided into our different cost bands. And so you can see how that shakes out within our three different cost bands. You can also see by kind of the map here of CRTPO that we contain almost 15% of the population of North Carolina. So a fairly straightforward calculation that we're using to come up with that subset. Similarly, for our regions, Region E, we have 61.4% of the population of Region E, which is Divisions 8 and 10, within CRTPO. So when you think about the $6.4 billion that's assumed for Region E, $3.9 billion of that is within the CRTPO region. For Region F, we're a much smaller percentage, only 8.7% of the population of Region F falls within the CRTPO boundary. So of the $3.4 billion available for that entire region, we are assuming that we are $294 million of that. Division 10, CRTPO contains a little over 81% of the population of Division 10, and that gives us $3.9 billion within the CRTPO region for that division. And then finally, Division 12, CRTPO contains almost 24% of the population of Division 12, which results in approximately $561 million. And if you're doing any quick math as you're looking at this, what you're seeing is that the dollar values for the individual divisions and regions themselves are also not equal. They themselves are divided by the populations of the division and the regions. So there's kind of that math happening overall, and then we're just a subset of that as well. So that brings us to our total roadway funding. When you look over all of the horizon years of our plan and you total that up for the statewide, the region level, and the division levels, we're looking at approximately $14.7 billion. I should note that these are in year of expenditure dollars. These are inflated values. So that 2% annual escalation rate that we talked about is included within what you're seeing here. Now, I do also just want to put this into perspective because we have that 2025 year where we have the projects within our TIP that are already there, thinking about the 2024 to 2028 time period and the funds that are shown in our developmental STIP as well. So we want to take those into account and think about from our total funds available, that 14.7, what is remaining for allocation. So you can see that, and it's kind of weird because it says millions, but we wanted to make sure you could see everything here. We essentially have $11.7 billion remaining for allocation here. And just for comparison to the 2045 MTP, this is quite a bit more. So why is this more? One of the big things that has changed over the past few years is that we did have a new federal transportation legislation that has come into play, the IIJA. So in comparison to what we had within the last MTP cycle, we are seeing an escalation overall in the funding that is available to us coming from the TIP. However, I think one of the things that is important to note, and you may have heard it reflected in some of the presentations that we've already heard today, is that the costs for the projects themselves have also drastically increased over recent years. So while we do have additional funding available, there are also significantly higher project costs that are kind of within what we're seeing there. So I think that that's helpful to note. One other thing that is also helpful to note in terms of the funds that are remaining for allocation, and I'll just kind of bring this into current year dollars also as a comparative, is that while we do have more funding remaining for allocation now by quite a bit than what we had in the previous year TIP, another point to think about is that NCDOT right now is kind of in a process of reassessing their TIP and kind of trying to right-size that to reckon with some of these project cost increases and actually think about what can be delivered within the timeframes that are available. And so what I think we're seeing is that there may be fewer projects actually included within that current TIP and that are moving out into those future years, thus meaning that we have more funding remaining for allocation than what we may have seen in previous versions of this STIP. So moving us into our next steps for roadway revenue estimates. As I mentioned, this is going to be back for the February 6th meeting, and ultimately the action in February is going to be considering the roadway revenue estimates for adoption in that month. We do, as I mentioned, have other non-roadway capital revenue projections that are either ongoing or forthcoming. Transit is underway. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the conclusion of our presentation. And then also elements such as bicycle and pedestrian and operations and maintenance are still to come. All right, I'm going to shift gears into our congestion management process and provide you all an update on that as well. First, a little bit of a background on the congestion management process. This is actually something that is an independent effort to the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, but is a complementary effort. So similar to the MTP, the CMP is also a federally required process. for any urban area that is classified as a transportation management area. So a transportation management area is simply any urban area with a population of 200,000 or more, which we certainly are. So when you are required to do a CMP, essentially what that means is that this is a regional approach to managing congestion and comprises a series of strategies and looking at your existing congestion data and applying those strategies to your congested locations. There is an opportunity here, and CRTPO has elected to memorialize this directly within the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So essentially to bring the two efforts alongside each other, which is a great way to kind of maximize the utility of the congestion management process. As Neil mentioned, this is also being guided by the CMP task force, something that is being kind of run alongside the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. But we've had the opportunity to kind of bring these two alongside each other, and we're working with some of the data and then hopefully bringing that back to the task force, and they're bringing information back to us. So it's very much a synergistic process. We wanted to highlight a few of the steps that have been involved with the CMP up until this point. One of the very first steps is establishing our CMP network. So all this is our starting point for our analysis. So I think one of the first questions might be, why do we have to do this? So what we're talking about is essentially just finding the roadway network that we need to analyze to determine what of this network is actually congested. What do we need to be focusing our attention on? And this gives us a better understanding of what data is available within that network, and then where can we think about the right types of strategies to apply to that network. So working with the various committees and using feedback that was received by the task force, we understood that we had a couple of different data sources at our disposal. One was the INRIX network. So this is nothing more than probe data, cell phone data. And this gives us more of a real-time, near-term understanding of what congestion is like within our area. It doesn't consist of every single road within our region. And when we looked at it, we thought that we actually needed a little bit more geographic coverage, particularly in some of our areas in Iredell County, in Union County, and in North Mecklenburg County. And so we brought alongside that our travel demand model and looked at some of the areas with a volume to capacity ratio, which is just taking a look at the capacity that's available on our roadways and any of those volumes that exceed that capacity or are approaching exceeding that capacity. So we brought those two alongside that. We also look at our functional class and then, of course, pass this along with our committee. So this is what we came up with our starting point. From there, I mentioned the INRIX data. From that, we're actually able to pull this information, travel time index. Our travel time index is a ratio of travel time during peak period to the travel time required to make a trip during free flow. So how much worse is it during peak period than if I was just traveling, let's say, in the middle of the night? So we have that information, and then we're able to bring alongside our volume to capacity. And you can see this is a little bit more spotty, but we're only looking at this for the roadways where we didn't have the INRIX data available. So it's kind of just that complement to bring on any of those places where a volume to capacity ratio that exceeds 1. So again, we have more volume on these roads than we have capacity to handle it. And so that brought us to our congested links map. And this essentially tells us these are the places we need to be focusing our attention on right now, because they have travel time issues, they have volume to capacity issues, and this kind of hybrid map gives us that for the geography that we felt like was most appropriate for the entirety of the region. So I mentioned some strategies that are an important part of developing a CMP. The CMP task force has already identified a series of CMP strategies, and they provide ways to more effectively manage the congestion before just defaulting to the addition of adding capacity. So this is a nice kind of intermediate step. For those of you all that are attending the work session for roadway project submission, you'll see that this is actually consideration for our roadway projects that are being submitted this time around to kind of think about how those strategies could be leveraged. The next step for the CMP is thinking about the definition of congested corridors. So now we have those links, but we actually want to think about logical corridors that can be established or identified. Those combine our congested links, anything that is coming out of our MTP and our TIP. So we'll want to make sure that we go through this roadway project submission process, finalize those projects, and then that's what we'll be adding into this, as well as running this back through the CMP task force. Our congested corridors, obviously we'll kind of get through this MTP project. So we'll come back a little bit later with the outcome here. And then at that point, TCC members will actually have the opportunity to weigh in on the potential strategies that could be appropriate to apply for those congested corridors. So that's kind of the final step of the CMP, is really thinking about how those could be enhanced by the application of the strategies that have been identified. Okay, we're getting closer, folks. Next up, land use scenario planning. So we have had the opportunity to speak with you all before through our workshop that we did last year to provide a little bit of background on our land use scenario planning process. We wanted to just provide a recap on kind of where we landed from that, and then give you all a sense of where we are and where we're headed. So as you know, in our 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we definitely employed a scenario planning process. This is something that CRTPO has done for some time. It is a recommended, though not required, best practice for metropolitan transportation plans. Last time there were actually a total of 10 scenarios, 1 status quo and 9 alternative scenarios. The alternative scenarios were focused around 3 drivers. One was connected and autonomous vehicle investment. One was growth patterns, and the third was telecommuting and the rate of adoption of telecommuting. So during our workshop that we had with you all, we came away with some key takeaways. There was a desire to perhaps streamline some of the scenarios. Thinking about some of those drivers that we heard, there was an understanding that during the preparation of the last MTP, we were at kind of a unique moment of time that was prepared during kind of the COVID era, where there was a lot of focus on work from home. There was a lot of focus on our connected and autonomous vehicles during that moment in time. So maybe stepping away from that particular driver, the CAV, and then thinking about some streamlined scenarios. There was, however, some additional focus on our performance measures, the ways in which we measure how our scenarios are actually doing. Could we come up with some additional performance measures that leverage the data we already have that's available to do a little bit more, to understand a little bit more about what the scenarios are actually telling us? And then build some discussion and hopefully make the communication a little bit more clear about some of the differences between the scenarios. So from all of that, we have come away with this with a modified scenario structure that we wanted to outline with you all today. And we'll just define these scenarios a little bit more in the following slides, but I'll just give you an overall sense here. So we maintained the 3 growth scenarios generally in a similar format than what we had the last time. So we have a distributed growth scenario, a scenario that reflects our current plans, and then a compact centers scenario. And then we are pairing those scenarios with 1 to 2 relevant work from home telecommuting scenarios, which are the traditional commuting scenario, which essentially reflects where we are right now in terms of work from home levels and what that looks like, and then a more substantial shift to telecommuting. So I want to walk through the definitions for our growth scenarios and kind of what those mean to us. So first, our distributed growth scenario. This is where growth occurs mostly in outlying and less developed areas. And I think from that, obviously, what we see is a more sprawling growth pattern. Obviously, without additional planning, rapidly growing regions often kind of see this as the kind of default outcome to what happens in the region. And there are some additional costs, either direct or indirect costs, as a result of this type of growth, whether they be the maintenance of infrastructure, increased traffic congestion, or decreased access for all modes. Now we have our current plans scenario. And our current plan scenario focuses on the growth patterns that are laid out in the adopted plans across the regions. And something that we have seen just in this comparison compared to where we were in our last scenario planning effort that was done in the previous MTP is that many of the jurisdictions have already taken significant steps toward a more compact growth pattern. So we see that reflected here. And I think that this is allowing us to reflect some of the jurisdictions that are working toward plan goals like making sustainable use of their infrastructure, conserving land, increasing multimodal options. So we're starting to see that more in this current plan scenario. Something that's also notable in this scenario is that it reflects the impacts of CTP recommended corridors, which was a comment that we had received from our advisory committee. So we wanted to be sure that that was reflected directly here with that emphasis on those CTP recommended corridors. And then our compact centers scenario. This does focus growth in a more limited set of centers throughout the region and is more suitable for significant compact growth. And it really represents a potential for further accelerating progress toward regional goals. Essentially, this scenario assumes that there's a little bit more of an aggressive approach. It pushes us further toward things like land conservation, building up those existing centers, or even also the encouragement of alternative modes. So just taking that concept further. Now for our work from home scenarios, I mentioned that we are, for each one of our scenarios, looking at 1 to 2 of these. And you can see that embodied here. So for our compact centers and our distributed growth scenarios, we wanted to look at those in kind of 2 different ways. One with current conditions and one with that more aggressive 20% additional telecommuting. And this is something that we're able to work with, kind of what we're seeing from the travel demand model to actually help us realize that. Now, we talked about performance measures. This was a place where we got a lot of great feedback from the work session with you all, and we were able to build on the existing performance measures. You see that set at left, and we actually added a number of performance measures based on your feedback and feedback from our steering committee and our advisory committee to come up with that list of additional performance measures. So we're excited to be able to report on those once we have all of the scenarios assembled. So our next steps, and we're in process with pretty much all of these right now, is running all of these alternative scenarios, calculating the performance measures for those scenarios, and then ultimately this will be embodied in a scenario report card that kind of allows more of an at-a-glance look to understand how each scenario is doing compared to the other scenarios for each one of those different performance measures. Something that we did want to note is that this report card is going to be available for review and use during the roadway project submission window. And so I think that's helpful for any of you all that are going to be involved in that process. If you're curious what this could mean for your region or for your jurisdiction, I should say, as you think about where you might want to fall within kind of the outcomes of the scenario planning process, that will be a resource that's available to you. I'm going to turn this back over to Neil to wrap us up.
Thanks, Allison. I'm not going to take too much time in going over this because I reviewed the schedule at the very beginning. But just looking ahead with the roadway project submission process, obviously we have the workshop this afternoon. That project submission window will begin on Monday, January 13th and close on Friday, February 14th. CRTPO staff, Travis and I, we will be at your assistance if you have questions or need help scoping or submitting projects. We're going to have office hours. We're going to record the workshop this afternoon if you all are not able to make it. And then another reminder about action requested next month for the TCC to recommend the roadway revenue projections to the board for their approval, because that's another key step to really starting the roadway evaluation project. process. And then transit revenue projections, we mentioned this briefly. We're going to be presenting at the Transit Providers Work Group meeting later on this month, a draft set of those revenue projections for our 4 transit providers. And then that information will be coming before the TCC and the board soon for an endorsement. So very long update. Thanks for bearing with us. Happy to take any questions that you all have.
Thank you. I feel like we should get PDHs after today's meeting. But awesome presentation. Any questions? All right.
More of a comment. Do you mind maybe distributing that presentation? Just because particularly the older I get, I have to read things 2 or 3 times to understand it. So basically I'm talking about the funding aspect, but
sure,
I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
What was the revenue increase assumptions the last time we did this?
The annual escalation that we used, 2%. And we met with FHWA and the STIP unit. They felt that 2% annually was still appropriate.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that we're going to adopt or recommend the revenue forecast at the next meeting. I'm curious, so in the STIP, draft STIP coming out also at that same time, and it kind of sets, that first tier or first horizon of the MTP. Any thinking of any opportunity to kind of tweak anything that we see in the draft STIP in terms of actual revenue programmed by the STI tiers and what that means for our future revenues?
So based upon the guidance of the STIP unit, we utilized the revenue projections for P7, which are the revenue projections used in that release of the drafts, the 2026-2035 STIP that will come before us next month. So I don't anticipate any major adjustments that we'll need to make with the revenue projections. If anything, what we're going to be seeing with this next STIP, it's a cash flow issue. They're going to continue, as far as we know, to receive that amount of revenue. So those are the assumptions we're making. And given the schedule with the MTP, we have to kind of take a snapshot in time of revenue projections at a certain point.
Any other questions? All right. Again, thank you all. Okay, real quick on our other reports and updates, Division 10 and 12. Construction updates were included in your packets. Sean and Anil are with us today. Feel free to grab them after the meeting if you have any questions. Alex, you have something for us?
Just one item. I'll be quick. Our bicycle helmet initiative is kicking off again. It just started yesterday on January the 8th. It runs until February the 14th. As a reminder, this is bicycle helmets we give away to various groups. They're children's helmets. A lot of nonprofits, police departments applied for these. They come in increments of 25 with a maximum of 100. And so it's one of my favorite programs. I just love promoting it. And so if you, in your personal life, work in a nonprofit and you think that would be useful, please do apply and let folks know about that. I've already submitted the public release or a public notice to Travis, so hopefully you can get that out today. If you need more information, I can always answer that is for you as well. But yeah, running until February the 14th, so please do consider applying if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Warren?
Sure. Just my luck, I have what I consider to be wonderfully interesting things to share, and the meeting's running over. So appreciate the opportunity as always. First of all, the mundane, as regulars are aware, January 1, we have automatic increases that occur in our expressway facilities in the state, Monroe Expressway, Triangle Expressway. So as of January 1st, the full-length trip on a Monroe Expressway with a prepaid account on a 2-axle vehicle, as we have these different stages of tolls, has gone up to $2.92, up from last year's $2.85. So that's a 7-cent increase for prepaid 2-axle vehicles. That's the mundane. Now for some of the exciting part. We've changed the discount. Previously, for years, we've talked that the transponder discount was 35% on the invoice rate. Well, the cost of collecting the invoices has gone up and up, and so now we're changing that. We're staying with our statutory ability to offer a discount, but the discount is now 50%, which means the invoice rate has gone up a good bit. It's also easier to communicate because it was kind of tricky on the math to say, well, it's a 35% discount on the invoice rate to the prepaid rate. But that means that the invoice is 54% more than the prepaid rate, and people didn't quite get that. So now we can say the transponder rate is 50% of the invoice rate. The invoice rate is twice the the prepaid rate. I keep saying prepaid for a reason. We'll get into that. So that's another exciting bit. We can change how we talk about that discount and encourage people to get transponders. Speaking of transponders, we've also started a retail program in conjunction with both 7-Eleven and Amazon.com. You can now get your NC QuickPass sticker transponder on Amazon.com. Just, in a packet of 1, 2, or 3, there's a processing cost of $3 each. So $3, $6, or $9, but you can just order it, add it to your cart on Amazon, maybe bump it up to the free shipping if you don't have Prime, and activate it once it arrives. Or we have 2 7-Elevens in the Triangle area and 3 in the Charlotte area, off of Monroe Road and Washburn, and 2 on Independence, 1 by the Walmart, 1 off of the Ottawa Road interchange, where you can walk into the 7-Eleven and buy a little packet with an NC QuickPass transponder on it. $3 again, activate it, fund it, and you're good to go. Finally, though, in the exciting world of tolling, I kept saying prepaid earlier because we've also introduced a new kind of prepaid account called NC Only. It is a toll by plate. No transponder is required. People can open that account with us, fund it as they would usually, but just give us the license plate number. No need to install a transponder. The catch is that works only in North Carolina facilities, so only on the Triangle Expressway, Monroe Expressway, and I-77. But it is a way that folks who don't necessarily want to bother with a transponder, but do want to get that discounted rate can do so, but only on North Carolina facilities. You need the transponder if you want to pay tolls easily in the 18 other states where our transponder is red. So exciting stuff to start the year on our part. Thank you for the extra time. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Warren. Jennifer.
Get excited.
If we could buy projects on Amazon.com, I wouldn't be here. As you probably noticed, the fall call recommended shortlist from the POC was not included in your packet. This time we are a month delayed, so the POC will meet next Thursday just to review the recommended list. I think there will be great outcomes. And so I will be back to the TSM and back with the TCC next month. I'll be back with the TSM just as soon as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Curtis.
Of course, we got a couple of agenda items in your TCC agenda, so take a look at that. And do want to give a quick shout out to the city of Charlotte for winning $1.4 million in ATIP funds for their Albemarle Cultural Trail. Y'all heard a bit about ATIP last fall. That's one of the grant programs to come out of IIJA. They had 352 applications and only 14 awards. And Charlotte was one of those awards. So congratulations to the city of Charlotte staff. That's all I got. Any questions that I can answer?
Thank you, Curtis.
Thank you.
Now for our last updates, Bob, and then Travis.
Just a couple of things, some good news. Earlier, we did introductions and Merritt introduced himself, but I do want to do it a little bit more formally. Merritt, if you don't mind standing up. Merritt McCulley is the newest member of our staff. He started with us in early December, and he will be coordinating all public involvement activities for CRTPO. So he has a lot on his plate next year with the RAISE grant and the SS4A grant and all the other things that we have to conduct public involvement about. But we're very happy that he's joined us. He joins us from the Mayfield Memorial Community Development Corporation, where he served as executive director since 2019. Merritt has a BA from Clemson and a MPA from UNC Charlotte. And an added bonus, he is a fluent Spanish speaker. So we have that skill set on staff. So we're very happy about that. If you have some time, if you're sticking around for the workshop, please say hello to Merritt. He'll probably be coming to your town fairly soon now that we're past the holidays. Also, I just wanted to mention a couple of other things real quick. Good news about Travis. He has been promoted to project manager. And in that role, he's going to be coordinating all TIP-related activities for us. As I think a lot of you know, in the recent years, certainly since STI, but in the past few years particularly, the tip development process has become very, very complex. So all tip development activities will be coordinated by Travis. So very happy about that.
I don't lose him as secretary though, right?
No, you are not.
Okay.
At least not for now, but we'll see. Since you're sticking around for a little bit, maybe we can negotiate. Yeah. Also, just wanted to mention real quick about two pieces of good news. Kendall, who could not be here today due to illness, he recently passed his Fundamentals of Engineering exam. That's the first step on the road to being a PE. So that was a big accomplishment for Kendall. And Will passed the AICP exam recently. So he is a certified planner at this point. So congratulations to them both. So just wanted to end with some good news. Thanks, everybody.
So 3 other announcements. First, as a reminder, we're going to have the training here for the roadway submittals. So we're going to have to reset the room and get things set up for that. So please just bear with us. As some of you may have heard, NCDOT has postponed the release of the draft tip and STIP. We're anticipating the release of that to be in February. The date of release is scheduled to be at the same time as the TCC meeting. So we might not have the full list for you at the TCC meeting, but we will bring it to the board and transportation staff meeting as soon as we can. And the following month, we'll give a presentation on that. And finally, in your inboxes, you will receive a save the date for a joint MPO roundtable on February 27th between the CRTPO and the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO. So just be on the lookout for the save the date notification. And those are my 3 updates.
All right. With that, thank you as always for your time, attention, and participation in the important work that we do. With that, we have completed all items on our agenda and we are adjourned.